On her wedding night, she said, "Our oath is only valid in this valley. If we leave here, everything will not count." Half a year after getting married, she encountered unexpected circumstances and had no choice but to feign death. He took it for granted. "I thought my fate was over, but my son came to complain to her. 'Mom, your eyes are not very good. I want to recognize that dad, but he treats me like a brother.' Keywords of the novel. Mother. How about a different father? No pop-ups, mother. How about a different father? Download the complete TXT collection, mother. How about a different father? Latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Joy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Joy. On a late autumn afternoon, although the sun above his head was not as hot as June, Wei Zijuan, wearing a straw hat and a face scarf, had already sweated on his forehead. With one hand, he wiped the sweat off his forehead with a handkerchief, and the other hand, he tugged at the backpack strap on his chest to ease the tension of the backpack suffix. On the way back from the town to the valley, Wei Zijuan's face was always filled with a joyful smile. The lunar events of this month are delayed, and she, who is skilled in medicine, has confirmed that she is pregnant. However, she deliberately left the valley and went to the town to see a doctor to confirm again. She really has a little life in her belly, she really wants to be a mother. Along the way, she thought a lot, whether the child in her belly would be a boy or a girl. It wasn't that she favored boys over girls, but rather that she wanted to prepare clothes for girls, or boys. She is thinking whether her child will look like herself or like him after giving birth. The words of the girl are like herself, and the words of the boy are most like him. She was still thinking about how to tell him the good news when she got home in the valley. Are you saying it right after entering the door? Or, make a few good dishes and tell him after he drinks a few glasses. And what kind of joy would he be when he heard the news that he was about to become a father? It has been 6 months since we got married, and this family is finally going to add new members. Naming is a happy thing to leave to him, who is a father, to decide. After all, his literary talent is better. The villagers in the valley, no one knows, her husband was picked up by her. Even Wei Zijuan himself did not expect that his kind-hearted act 9 months ago would actually lead to his marriage. She remembers the scene very clearly at that time. After fleeing her family, she chose to go to neighboring country in Yugua, which was plagued by frequent wars and epidemics, for safety reasons. A place that others avoid, but for her, it may be the safest place. Because no one believes that the famous Wei family in Yangli Kingdom, the clever eldest daughter of a wealthy family, would run away from home and choose to go to the most chaotic and unstable places. As soon as you cross the border of Enyuko and enter Lucheng, all you see in front of you are various desolate and tragic situations. The cities and villages destroyed by war, the visible graves along the way, and the hasty burial of yellow soil without covering them tightly with straw mats. And Yugua doesn't know if he has done something against the heavenly way, with frequent natural and man-made disasters, wars, snowstorms, and epidemics. Their monarch issued an order not to allow refugees from the disaster to go towards the direction of the capital. But because the Empress gave birth to a new prince, she wanted to celebrate and grant amnesty to the whole world. She not only ordered the resettlement of refugees and disaster victims who suffered from war and snow disasters, but also the survivors of the epidemic. Both are homeless and pitiful people, but due to the survivors in the epidemic area, they may carry the epidemic and infect others. Therefore, the surviving people in the epidemic area have become a lower-ranking presence among the refugees. They need to tie green cloth strips on their arms as a warning to distinguish them, so that other disaster victims can distance themselves from them and ensure that something unexpected happens. Wei Zijuan voluntarily joined the ranks of the disaster victims in the epidemic area and tied a green cloth strip. The only benefit for her was that on the long road ahead, she would not be malicious by any unscrupulous people. Even disaster victims have villains, but villains spare their lives. After several days of traveling together, Wei Zijuan learned that the area where the epidemic occurred was very wide, involving many villages and towns, and even some villages where whole villagers died, without exception. Not all of them died from the epidemic, but rather because there were too many deaths. In order to prevent the spread of the epidemic, the government surrounded and burned the entire village. Those who died, those who were sick but still gasped for breath, and those who looked still healthy, were all set on fire. When he heard these words, Wei Zijuan's heart wrenched. The government's handling methods were too cruel, and the villagers who were burned to death were too pitiful and innocent. It was too tragic. Even if her blood has detoxification and purification effects, if it were not at the beginning of the epidemic, but after it has spread and spread, even if her blood is drained and given to those people to drink, it would probably be powerless. It was precisely because of this that she dared to infiltrate the ranks of the disaster victims in the epidemic area at that time. Her blood was special, and even if the other party still had the epidemic bacteria, she would not have contracted them. The Emperor of Anugua ordered at the place where these refugees were sheltered and resettled be the desolate and sparsely populated Broken Soul Valley, far from the capital city of Dajuan. There are two ways to enter the valley, one is by land and the other is by water. However, the waterway of the Broken Soul Valley is a turbid river with an unknown number of crocodiles inside. Cruel and ferocious, any living creature that falls into the water is their food. So, this river is also called the Broken Soul River. The soldiers said it was an escort, but in reality, it was a refugee who was being escorted. Even if they knew the destination was here, they dared not escape because someone did it initially, but they were caught and executed by the soldiers as a warning to others. Moreover, they have no other better choice for the time being. At least on the way of being escorted, the government is in charge of food. Although it is all miscellaneous grains and cakes, clear water congee is better than begging and starving to death on the way. Wei Zijuan's husband was found on his way to this soul-broken valley. At that time, he was in tattered clothes, covered in injuries, and due to blindness, the food he received was repeatedly stolen. Eventually, he was exhausted and sat under the locust tree by the roadside, waiting to die. Everyone receives a pitiful amount of food every day, and even if someone sees him, no one will share the food that sustains their life with him. When Wei Zijuan saw him, he walked over and gave him half of the cake and half a bowl of rice soup. When Wei Zijuan saw a thief with sly eyes staring at the food in his hand next to him, he did not immediately leave. Instead, he stood on the side, ensuring that all the food he had given him could fit into his stomach. After he finished eating, Wei Zijuan lifted his foot and left, but after taking a few steps, his feet felt as if they were falling from a heavy object and he couldn't lift them up. His situation is so bad, leaving him there would still be like dying. I gave him pancakes and congee before, hoping that he would live. After much hesitation, Wei Zijuan turned around and walked back to the locust tree, asking if he was willing to go with him. At that time, he seemed to have never expected anyone to say such things to him, and nodded in amazement, saying yes. So Wei Zijuan took him with him. I originally thought that when he arrived at the destination and his physical condition improved, he would leave. However, at the entrance of the Broken Soul Valley, the government posted a large notice on the nearby rocks, and the yamen attendants registered at the entrance also occasionally sounded gongs to remind them that the houses in the valley were limited, and those who were closely accompanying their families should go first. For those who are single, they need to concentrate on those simple large tents. It's not that Wei Zijuan can't bear such hardship, but she knows that living in such an environment is really inconvenient for her as a young woman. Looking at him, who was also single by his side, Wei Zijuan thought for a moment and then offered his proposal. The two of them falsely claimed to be a family, so that they could have a fixed and separate place to live. He thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. When she came forward to register, before Wei Zijuan could speak, the yamen keeper glanced at her and wrote about the couple. She wanted to explain and correct it, but the yamen keeper looked at the people waiting in chaos behind her and was very impatient. Wei Zijuan gave up. Fortunately, due to the chaos on site and the lack of patience among the Yamen officials, the registration of the names and sources of the disaster victims was not rigorous at all. They filled in the information as they pleased. So, Wei Zijuan gritted her teeth and said a place name she had heard from her peers. She reported her name as Wei Sanyang, but he didn't ask for his name because she didn't expect to form a temporary home. When I turned around to ask him, the busy Yamen runner impatiently drove them away and urged the next family to come forward and register. Whether it's the emperor's decision to bring blessings to the newly born prince or to gain a good reputation, it's not uncommon for the servants to be perfunctory or careless in their work in remote places like the high mountains and far away from the emperor. The people who enter this soul-broken valley are also subject to fate in the future. The court only gives them a place to rest, and no matter what, who knows how many people will survive in a period of time. This registration process is just a facade, just a passing act. Thinking of this, Wei Zijuan looked at the entrance of the valley ahead and smiled. At that time, they had already lied to him about being married, but no one even knew his surname and name. Usually when he went out to buy things, he would go with him. He said he didn't trust her to go out alone in the valley. He couldn't see, but he said he had strength and carried all the baskets. This time, I came out alone to make sure if I was really pregnant. Wei Zijuan was very tired and hungry, and he also wanted to stop and put down his backpack to rest. Because they had a small population at that time, the accommodation they were assigned was further away from the valley mouth. But she wants to get home earlier, see him earlier, and tell him the good news earlier. So, Wei Zijuan stopped for a moment and then lifted his leg to continue walking forward. Has Sanyang come back? As soon as she entered the valley, the person walking towards her greeted her. Well, Aunt Qian, are you going to pick mushrooms? Wei Zijuan responded with a smile. Throughout the valley, Wei Zijuan was only slightly familiar with Aunt Qian. Well, didn't it rain yesterday? I was thinking about how many mushrooms are growing on the mountain today. If you pick more, you can sell them. If you can't sell them, they can be dried on good days or pickled on bad days. It's still a dish in winter. Aunt Qian didn't finish her sentence, and she had already walked a distance, afraid that the mushrooms on the mountain might be picked by someone else. Wei Zijuan also quickened his pace towards home, and after separating from a fork in the road, it was a rugged winding mountain path. Today, I brought out the medicinal herbs and embroidery products from the valley. Although they still didn't sell at a good price, they were enough to buy a full basket of things. I bought rice, noodles, fabric for making clothes and bedding for my child, and also bought a carp and 2 pounds of wine for him. He likes to eat her sweet and sour fillet, drink a small wine, and then hear the good news of the upcoming father. Wei Zijuan can imagine his expression and reaction just by thinking about it. He should be shocked first, then surprised. After taking a few more turns, I finally saw their home. When I first got my hands on it, it was very simple. A wooden house that would leak in heavy rain and also leak air. But after 9 months of hard work in repairing, the house still looks shabby, at least not leaking rain or air. And they also surrounded a fence and a courtyard gate. Around the fence, wild chrysanthemums dug by Wei Zijuan were planted, and on one side of the door was a wisteria tree. Although the plant shape is not large now, it still grows. There are many large trees on the mountain, and he also has the strength to dig. The key is that she is afraid that the plants will be too big and it will be difficult to survive if they are moved. Why is the door still closed? Shouldn't he be sitting in the yard drinking tea at this time? Tea is stir-fried from wild tea she picked on the mountain, and he likes it very much. Wei Zijuan, who pushed open the courtyard door, looked at the tightly closed door and was very puzzled. Entering the yard, she didn't care whether the chickens she was raising laid eggs. She headed straight towards the door, which was only 2 steps away. Suddenly, the door opened and she saw him sitting there. Just as he breathed a sigh of relief and wanted to greet him, Wei Zijuan suddenly remembered that he was sitting there well. Who opened this door? End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Uninvited Guests. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Uninvited Guests. From Wei Zijuan's current position, one can clearly see the serious expression on her husband's face. She also noticed other abnormalities in her home, but because he was inside, she walked straight in without hesitation. Stepping into the door, Wei Zijuan saw a person standing on either side of the room door. Although one of them was also dressed as a man, Wei Zijuan could be certain that it was a woman dressed as a man. Huaigu, who are they? Are they okay? It was obvious that the two strangers were very wary of the man, while the woman disguised as a man had a face full of hatred. Wei Zijuan walked straight to her husband's side, placed the basket on the table, and asked softly. Brother Huai. The woman pulled her long voice, which made Wei Zijuan find it very annoying. You guys go out first, stay away, Huaigu said coldly. The man immediately walked out in response, while the woman was unwilling to leave. However, looking at Brother Huai's expression, which he dared not disobey, she gave Wei Zijuan a fierce glance before leaving. There were only two husband and wife left in the room, and because of something sudden, the husband did not respond to what he had just said. Wei Zijuan didn't know what to say for a moment. Looking at her husband's expression and slightly furrowed brows, she felt a bad feeling in her heart. After living with him here, I asked him his name and where he lives. But he said that after the brain was hit, he couldn't remember anything. I don't know my surname or name, nor do I know where my home is. So, Wei Zijuan named him Lu Huai. Lu is the same pronunciation as the road by the roadside, Huaymo. I saw him under a big locust tree and asked him if he liked this name. He said yes, it's Lu Huai. Wei Zijuan called the mountain spring water and asked him to rinse it first. When he saw him wearing clean clothes again, he didn't expect that the person he picked up casually would be so fair and handsome. Even wearing the worst coarse cloth clothes distributed by the government, it is still difficult to conceal his extraordinary temperament. No matter how you look at it, it's not as simple as being a wealthy young master. After spending a few more days together, Wei Zijuan suspected that his injured amnesia was simply a form of self-protection. She was not angry because the other party concealed and deceived her. Even if she didn't think from the other party's perspective, she just thought of herself. Isn't there a true identity that cannot be honest about? She didn't treat him with sincerity, did she? Tell him, it's also a temporary pseudonym. They all had unavoidable difficulties, of course, we need to understand. Besides, their relationship at that time was just mutual help, having a place to live. However, Wei Zijuan himself did not expect that people have emotions. They spend time together day and night, and over time, they will develop feelings. One day, after living in the same wooden house for over 3 months, Wei Zijuan went to chop firewood. He returned late because he got lost. When he arrived not far from the door, he saw him anxiously looking towards her, covered in dust. At that time, when she saw that scene, her heart was very moved. At least now, there are still people worried about her and remembering her. But when he heard her footsteps, he rushed over, first holding her tightly in his arms, and then shouting loudly, "Why did he return so late?" After the violence was over, I urgently asked her if she had fallen or been injured. That night, after half a bowl of homemade buckwheat wine was consumed, he asked if he was willing to marry him. Upon hearing this, Wei Zijuan was stunned. During the several months she spent together, she had thought about this issue. If she were to become a husband and wife with this man from now on, and live here for the rest of her life, she would also be able to live a peaceful life. But every time I think of two people who cannot be honest about each other's true identities and names, how can we further develop a relationship as husband and wife? The most basic thing between couples is not to trust each other, and not being honest with each other is not to trust each other. Can such a marital relationship be reliable? How long can it last? However, When he heard him say this with his own ears and asked this question, Wei Zijuan hesitated for a moment and thought for a moment before he had an answer in his heart. She likes this man, whom she has never liked before, and she doesn't know much about love between men and women, so she doesn't know if her liking for him can be considered love. However, she was deeply touched by his nervous and caring appearance towards herself. She also liked this feeling, so she agreed to marry him. What kind of person is he? Is it that important? As long as he has her in front of him, in the present moment, caring about her is enough. That night, the two of them were in the yard, bowing to the bright moon in the sky and becoming a true couple. In the room, the makeshift wooden bed made for him was dismantled the next day, and 2 chairs were sawn and made. In the days after marriage, until this moment, Wei Zijuan never questioned or used clichés to inquire about his real name and identity. She told herself that he was her husband, and Huaigu was fine. In the 6 months after marriage, the relationship between the two has deepened day by day. He secretly woke up early every day to practice martial arts. Wei Zijuan was very aware of it, but she kept pretending to be confused. When she heard him enter the room after practicing well, she stretched out as if she had just woken up. She doesn't think there's anything wrong with it, she hopes to maintain it forever for the rest of her life. Of course, she had also worried that one day such a happy life would be interrupted due to her or his identity, but every time she comforted herself, don't think too much about this unhappiness, it would affect her good mood. Being married to him, even if it was a beautiful dream, she would be willing, even if one day her dream would wake up. Isn't it good for her to be happy and earn a day without waking up from her dream? But I didn't expect that this day would come so quickly. The person who interrupted their happy dreams came from his side. It seems that his people are more powerful, not his own family and those over there. The couple inside the room remained silent, so quiet that they could hear the sound of the wind blowing through the treetops outside. Wei Zijuan hoped that he could speak up to answer his previous question, but after silence, he was afraid that he would speak up. I'm afraid that if he speaks up, some things may have a conclusion and cannot be reversed. Sanyang, Lu Huai finally spoke up. Brother Huai, I haven't had lunch yet, have I? I'm also hungry, so I'll go make lunch first. Wei Zijuan was flustered in his heart and interrupted him. He picked up his backpack and went out into the kitchen built by the 2 people next to him. Entering the kitchen, Wei Zijuan closed the door and leaned against it, releasing his hand and sliding his basket onto the ground. The wine jar inside rolled out and stopped at the edge of the firewood. At this moment, Wei Zijuan's heart was in turmoil and his thoughts were also in turmoil. He leaned against the kitchen door and worked hard to calm down after a moment. She figured out why she was upset. Finding his person was not the key point, the key was that he was hesitant to speak to her now, and he was in a difficult position. Why is it difficult? Obviously, it's because of her presence. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Decisions. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Decisions. In order to come back and see him quickly, Wei Zijuan told him his surprise earlier and didn't even have lunch in town. But now she doesn't feel hungry anymore. She said she was hungry to make lunch, and when she entered the kitchen, she seemed to be completely empty. Sitting on the ground with the body sliding down and hands in the position of the abdomen, thinking of it, looking at the ceiling, is this what is called extreme joy brings sorrow? Just because I was happy with the good news, when I returned home and waited for myself, it was the opposite of happiness. Wei Zijuan had no intention of making lunch in the kitchen, while Lu Huai, who was in the room at the moment, was also restless and irritable. After getting married, he seemed to have forgotten his original identity and was already immersed in this ordinary married life. Every day, before she wakes up, she practices martial arts in the backyard and ends before she wakes up. Then she began to wash up and listen to her tinkling breakfast in the kitchen. In poor conditions, she could even make delicious food using miscellaneous grains and wild vegetables. He can't see, she's very considerate, but when he needs his help, she still talks. Huaigu, help me, Huaigu is too heavy, I can't do it alone. But at the moment they arrived today, he knew that his good days and peaceful life had come to an end. Their arrival also reminded him of his identity, the responsibility he had to bear, and even more reminded him of the deep-seated hatred of killing his mother, as well as the unrequited revenge for the harm he had done 9 months ago. But now he is no longer alone, he is someone with a wife. If you take her with you, it's like putting her in danger. But if he left her here alone, he couldn't do it. After spending more than 9 months together day and night, and half a year as a husband and wife, he couldn't do without her anymore. She is used to calling Huaigu every day and likes to listen to her voice and laughter. Accustomed to eating the dishes she cooked, although they were all plain and simple, they were even more delicious than the delicacies he had consumed before. I like the wild tea she cooks, I like her coquettishness, and I like her shy moans at night. I don't know when she started, she has become a part of his life, a very important part, so important that, like now, being apart for a few hours is as long as being apart for a few years. Regretting why I didn't insist on going with her, I was worried that something might happen on her way. As a result, she returned safely, but it was herself who was in trouble. A few people hidden in the dark outside the courtyard anxiously looked inside, wanting to go in and urge and persuade again, but considering the temperament of the one inside, no one dared to act recklessly. Several men coincidentally looked at the woman disguised as a man, but she didn't dare to enter. They were even more afraid, so they had to wait honestly. Fortunately, the person has finally been found, alive and well. Not only did he live well, but he also got married. If he finds him later, he may have children. Who was the first to rumor that this person didn't like women and liked men's style? Or, due to the current situation, being alone and lonely. A few chickens in the cage in the courtyard are grumbling and clattering, laying eggs every day. The owner rewards them for eating corn. What's wrong with them today? Did the owner come to pick up the eggs happily even after they disappeared? Do you dislike the small eggs they laid today? Looking at the world, it's almost big, not small, clucking. Sitting on the ground in the kitchen, Wei Zijuan suddenly remembered that he still had a baby in his belly and couldn't sit on the cold ground. He quickly propped himself up and sat on a small stool made of cattail next to the stove. Staring at the unburned charcoal fire in the stove, my heart was still in turmoil, not knowing how to face what was happening in front of me. Go out and persuade him not to be difficult. But how should I persuade myself? The sunlight moved slowly through the window frames on the kitchen floor, and the sky gradually darkened. Wei Zijuan became nervous again when he heard footsteps coming towards him from outside. The door didn't latch, but people outside didn't push it in. Instead, a soft knocking sound sounded. "San Yang, do you come out or do I go in? I have something to say to you." His voice was tense and cautious, not much like his previous self. Wei Zijuan's heart suddenly hurt as he listened, and he also suddenly realized what he was doing. How could I forget the original intention when I promised to marry him? Isn't it just a dream of beauty and happiness when I did it well? Aren't we already mentally prepared to wake up at any moment? Since this moment has arrived, what problem can restlessness solve? Calm down and face it. There are just two outcomes, one is that he wants to take himself with him, and the other is that he cannot take himself with him. However, regardless of the outcome, it's not what you want. He takes himself with him, although the couple will not separate, and he can also see his father when the child is born. But she thought about why she had escaped from her family and came here. His identity is extraordinary and he has the ability to protect himself and his children. However, wasn't it because he was in big trouble that he came here at that time? And she herself is also a big trouble, so even if he leaves here with her, one day in the future, when her big trouble comes to her, it may also affect him. At this moment, Wei Zijuan's mind suddenly became clear and clear. "Brother Huai, I'll cook dinner first, and I'll say it later while eating." After a moment of silence outside, a low, pleasant and magnetic voice said, "Okay, shall I make a fire? No need, you go pick up the eggs. Wei Zijuan cleared his mind and his tone of voice returned to normal. The person outside responded well again, identified the direction, walked towards the direction of the chicken cage, and accurately stopped in front of the chicken cage. With one hand picking up the collar, and the other hand groping to pick up eggs, carefully carrying them. A few people outside were dumbfounded. I'm going, what is the master doing? Picking up eggs. It's too much to let my cousin do such a thing, said the woman with angry eyes and gritted her teeth. She has admired people since childhood, but they are like dragons and phoenixes among people. The other people next to them heard this and tried to persuade each other, but exchanged glances. Seeing that no one was willing to speak first, they all gave up. Speak up and persuade this person. Why do you have to be blamed by her if you can't handle it? Why do you do that foolish thing of asking for trouble? However, the skilled action of picking eggs in the yard shows that he often does this. Not to mention, he is quite down to earth. There is no sense of discord between his clothes and the yard. On the contrary, there is quite a sense of joy. How many people watched the person in the courtyard carrying eggs back to the house, and when they came out again, they were holding a bowl of yellow orange in their hand. Is this corn kernels? Oh my goodness, I can even feed chickens. Several people's chins were almost startled to the ground. Hey, I said, will we be affected when we go back? A man whispered as he used his thumb to swipe over his neck. Not so much, it's not just us brothers who saw it, isn't there still that one? Someone responded softly. As soon as others heard it, they felt it made sense, and the heart they had just brought up relaxed again. Seeing smoke rising from the kitchen chimney, I listened to the sound of cutting and frying vegetables inside, and soon there was a fragrance floating out. Several people almost swallowed their saliva at the same time, their stomachs growling loudly. The one inside should have the kitchen person prepare everyone's portion, right? There's no need for too many dishes, nor is it good. Cabbage, radish, and vegetables are all good, as long as they can fill the stomach. The wind, food, and camping reminded me to nervously search for my master for over 9 months. After finally finding him, the big guy's stomach seemed to suddenly become hungry. Not long after, I saw the person in the kitchen carrying the stir-fried vegetables into the room, tossing and turning back and forth a few times. Then, the door closed and there was no more. Okay, let's all eat the cold pancakes in our arms. San Yang, did you make sweet and sour fillet? Lu Huai asked, holding his wife's chopsticks in her hand. Well, I bought this fish from the rabbit skin we peeled, and I haven't made it for you to eat for a long time. I also bought wine from the Li family's tavern. I'll have a drink with you today. As Wei Zijuan spoke, he placed the filled glass beside his hand. San Yang, you. Lu Huai was a bit worried when she heard that she was going to drink with him, because she usually doesn't drink alcohol. Brother Huai, that's all for this cup. By the way, you should eat the fish first. If it's cold, it won't taste good. If there's anything, let's eat it well before we talk. Wei Zijuan didn't give him a chance to speak, it was just an opportunity to say something. What he wanted to say was actually something she was curious about, but now she had made a decision in her heart and didn't want to listen or ask anything. As he spoke, as usual, he helped him pick the fish bones and placed the fish meat in the bowl in front of him. Lu Huai fell silent for a moment, reached out his chopsticks and picked up the fish from the bowl. As he ate it, the fish still had his favorite taste. However, at this moment, his eyebrows couldn't help but furrow again. Her reaction made him very uneasy. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Emergencies. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Emergencies. Lu Huai knew what she should say, but she also expressed that she had something to say after dinner, so he had to rely on her. Taste this sauce beef, this wine is the best, Wei Zijuan said as he put it into a bowl. Then, looking at a cup of wine in front of me, I realized that the days were getting better and better. I didn't even need a rough big bowl to drink, but a small one. What a pity. The peaceful days here come to an end. He said he was there to have a drink with him, but Wei Zijuan couldn't resist. He picked up the cup of wine in front of him and drank it in one gulp. The spiciness of the wine made her throat hot. Before leaving the family, she would drink alcohol and come here to live with him without any alcohol. She was afraid that she would make a slip of her tongue when drunk, say things that shouldn't be said, and ask things that shouldn't be asked. She really cherishes every day they spend together, afraid of doing something wrong and breaking this peaceful and harmonious happiness. But now, she needs a drink. The person sitting across from her, unable to see with both eyes, knew from her voice that she had already had 2 glasses of wine. Open your mouth, but don't know what to say, advise her to drink less. He stretched out his chopsticks to pick up the dishes from his wife's bowl. He didn't want to change this kind of life, but now it seems impossible. Most of the sweet and sour fillet went into Lu Huai's stomach, and he just drank 2 glasses of wine. Wei Zijuan saw that he had almost finished eating, and then picked up a wine jug to pour wine for him. Listening to the sound of pouring wine, Lu Huai tilted her head and said, "Sun Yang, don't you usually make me drink less? That's on weekdays. Isn't this a special situation? Come on, have another drink. Even if you want to continue drinking, I won't let you drink anymore." Wei Zijuan smiled and said, placing the wine jug in his hand next to the small table. There was also a jug with wine inside. The person across from her cannot see, so she is not worried about being discovered. There are 2 wine pots on the table, and the wine she just poured is actually different from the wine in the previous pot. "Okay, then have another drink," Lu Huai responded, taking it up and drinking it all in one gulp. "Brother Huai, let's have a wedding together. I'll give you a gift for my wife," Wei Zijuan said with a sour nose. "Sun Yang, please don't think and guess recklessly. Listen to me." Lu Huai felt even more uneasy when she heard her words. She felt like she needed to say something, but halfway through, she felt her head start to spin. When Wei Zijuan saw him like this, he quickly stood up and walked to his side, timely supporting him who was about to fall to the bed, and pulled the blanket to cover him. "Sun Yang, actually I am." Lu Huai blurted out a few more words before completely falling asleep. Wei Zijuan sat by the couch and looked at Jun Yan who was sleeping. "Huai Gu, who you are is not very important to me now. All I need to remember is that you are my husband, my Huai Gu, and the father of my unborn child. You have reasons why you can't continue to stay. I don't ask, I don't want to persuade you to change your mind, and I don't want to make it difficult for you. Actually, it's not that I belittle my own abilities. Even if I persuade you to become a father, you won't change your mind and stay, right? Once again, your people have come here, and this is no longer our stable home. The saying goes that trees desire tranquility but the wind does not stop. Many things are not done as we please. Although I don't understand your situation, I know your last resort and don't want you to be in a difficult situation. Tonight, I was going to tell you that even though it was only half a year, you have already given the best gift to a couple. However, I have decided not to tell you the good news. If I tell you, you will be even more in a difficult situation. Even if you don't take me with you, you will have an extra concern. That way, it will make you have weaknesses and make you unable to let go of what you need to do. Our child, I will take good care of it. I am already very satisfied. As a person, I cannot be too greedy and cannot expect to get more, can I?" After finishing these words, Wei Zijuan didn't rush to tidy up the dishes. Instead, he fastened the door and took out a few candles to light around his head. Then, in the simple cabinet, I reached for a cloth bag and unfolded it, which contained a row of silver needles. Wash his hands with the wine from the wine pot on the table, and then start administering needles to his head. In fact, the problem of his blindness in both eyes was studied by her after the 2 of them settled down and their lives stabilized. She felt that she could cure his blindness. But I never told him from beginning to end, fearing that if it couldn't be cured, it would give him hope and make him suffer disappointment again. First, in his daily diet, he was given tonic diet to recuperate his body. It was estimated that it would take about half a month to apply acupuncture. Today, on the way back to the valley, he was still thinking about it. When his eyes were cured, he would be able to see the birth of his child, watch the child grow up day by day, and see what he and she looked like. But now, as a last resort, we have to move forward. Dang dang, someone gently knocked on the door and said, "Cousin, it's me. Have you slept yet? Come out for a moment, we have something to discuss with you." Wei Zijuan's needlework did not stop. "Sorry, we have already fallen asleep. Let's talk about anything tomorrow, or does this cousin want to come in and stand by the couch and talk? You are shameless." Wei Zijuan's words made the people outside the door very popular. However, Wei Zijuan didn't care about these things and continued to focus on administering the needle. After about a burn of incense, he took off the needle. After tidying up his things briefly, Wei Zijuan lay down next to Lu Huai in his clothes, placing one of his hands on his lower abdomen. "Huai Gu, this is our child, so you should be good, and I will be good too. Our family of 3 should be good." A few people in the yard outside, watching as the candles inside the house were extinguished, were in a hurry and had no choice but to wait patiently for dawn. A few men all sympathized with the one who wiped tears from their back. "Let her not come with them, come and go. Now it's okay, can't stand it anymore." However, they were also a bit worried about the woman inside. They could say that they were quite familiar with the temperament of the crying woman outside. She was determined to win over the one inside, and now that this was the case, they would definitely trip up the woman in the future. Even if that woman has someone to protect her, it's impossible not to leave for a moment. There will be hardships to bear then. That night felt particularly long for those outside, while Wei Zijuan inside felt too brief. At dawn, the roosters in the chicken coop are lively and chirping. Upon hearing the sound of the door opening, several people outside the courtyard quickly rubbed their eyes and perked up, but when they looked left and right, they saw only a woman coming out, not another one. "Good morning, young lady. May I ask my master who he is?" Someone was pushed forward by a companion and asked cautiously. With alert eyes, they looked towards the door behind Wei Zijuan, fearing that he might suddenly appear and get angry because everyone was bothering him. "He had a few more drinks last night and hasn't woken up yet. If you want to take him away now, you can do it," Wei Zijuan replied. Is it really possible?" A few people walked into the yard, feeling a bit skeptical. "Yesterday when I was sober, I didn't even finalize my statement. Can I do it early this morning? Or did the master chat with this person all night and then make a decision?" My cousin had already rushed into the room and quickly rushed out. She angrily approached Wei Zijuan and said, "What have you done to my cousin? He has such a good tolerance for alcohol, how could he possibly drink too much?" Wei Zijuan was not afraid to look at the other person's gaze and said, he felt uncomfortable because he didn't want to leave this place. He drank a few more glasses, and that wine was stronger. "I am his hair-tied wife. How could I possibly do something bad to him, girl? You've been overthinking it. Don't believe it, just find someone who understands medicine to take a look and you'll know. Moreover, isn't his behavior better for you all? You. Don't you have a mirror in your house? How could such an ugly person still claim to be my cousin's wife?" The woman blushed with anger, wishing to swallow Wei Zijuan alive. Wei Zijuan smiled and said, "I'm sorry, I'm ugly, but he's blind and can't see. He wouldn't mind." Okay, her words added fuel to the fire and made the woman angry enough to slap her. At this moment, a warning whistle sounded not far away. "Not good, there's an enemy following us. It seems there are quite a few people, what should we do?" said a man nervously beside him. The woman didn't care about being tough anymore and looked towards the direction of the warning. It seems that you can't do it either. Go, take him with me. Wei Zijuan said, knowing the urgency of the situation from the expressions on the faces of several people. Don't believe her, the woman immediately said. Wei Zijuan sneered and said, don't pretend to be clever. If you don't believe me here, who do you believe? A few men looked at each other and immediately rushed into the house, carrying Lu Huai out. Wei Zijuan said to follow me and took the lead in running out. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Riverside. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Riverside. The escape route was established after she settled down in the valley. The uniqueness of her blood is not found in every member of the Wei family, and although they are all women, it does not mean that every woman born in the Wei family has special blood. Sometimes it occurs across generations, and sometimes even if it is born to the same mother, it may not always occur. It is rare to have one in a generation, with an extremely low probability. It is precisely for this reason that the Wei family was able to receive royal treatment for generations. Women with this special blood are also loved and spoiled by their families. Who makes the Qi royal family feel like they are cursed. The more excellent the male born in the royal family, the higher the probability of carrying poison in their body. In this way, the Wei and Qi royal families seem to be a perfect match from heaven. Whenever a child is born in the Wei family, as long as it is a girl, the first thing to do after giving birth is to have a blood test to confirm if she is. When Wei Zijuan was very young, he didn't know about these things. He always thought that he was favored in the family because he was the legitimate daughter of the Wei family. When I was 9 years old, I quarreled with the sisters of the second aunt's family. When the other person was unscrupulous, he told me the reason. From birth, she was favored by her family and received the royal family's birthday gift every year. After the year of her birth, she had to enter the palace as a concubine. It sounds like an enviable life, but it turns out it's just because of the special blood in her body. Wei Zijuan once met the crown prince's side, which was a brief moment that made her feel resistant. The crown prince, who was only 12 years old, ordered someone to remove some charcoal from the warm stove prepared by his maid and stuff it into the maid's collar. The maid's screams, the smoke emanating from her collar, and the smell of burnt skin at the time were still unforgettable to Wei Zijuan. The 12-year-old prince is so cruel and cold-blooded. Such a person who will succeed to the throne and become an emperor is undoubtedly a reliable tyrant. Such a person should have died early due to poisoning. Wei Zijuan doesn't want such a person to live long, let alone be their bedside companion. So, from that time on, what Wei Zijuan thought about every day was how to get rid of the so-called arrangement of fate. She didn't want to be a concubine for such people, and didn't want to prolong their lives with her own blood. She felt like she was an accomplice in the future to harm loyal and virtuous people. She didn't know why, even though she had never studied medicine, she was proficient in it herself. At first, I was afraid of being treated as a monster and didn't dare to tell anyone. Later, as I grew older, I didn't want to tell anyone. And that self-taught culinary skill, even when I was in the family before, I didn't dare to show any of it. She tried to behave well until one day, when the opportunity came, she fled the Wei family and the Yangli kingdom. She knew that both the Wei and Qi royal families would not give up until they saw her body. So, in Wei Zijuan's heart, the matter of escape was put first. So, once you settle down after entering the valley, you can start taking preventive escape routes. Unexpectedly, it was actually used. Although the reason for using it was not her own, it didn't make much difference to her. His people can all find this place, so it's possible that his own people and the Qi royal family will also find it here, but it's just a matter of time. According to her words, when these people pulled out the raft from a hole on the shore, and there were several packages on it, they all looked at her in surprise. However, in such extreme circumstances, even if they were curious, they never had the opportunity to ask her. This avoids the trouble of explanation, and as for the situation after escaping, she is even less worried because it won't happen at all. The river is flowing rapidly. After putting the raft on, everyone gently supported it with a bamboo pole, and the raft flowed downstream. Is my master really okay? After flattening the master, the person asked again. I am married to him, what reason do I have to harm him? Wei Zijuan responded calmly as he looked at the person still asleep. Since leaving, she has never been closer to Lu Huai's side again, it's not that they won't let her. She just looked at him, that was her husband, but from then on, we may never see each other again in this life, right? From acquaintance to marriage, he didn't even know what his wife looked like. Look, what's that? Suddenly, someone pointed to something floating on the river around the raft and exclaimed in fear. Don't panic, keep calm. As long as people don't fall into the water and don't do anything to them, it's okay, Wei Zijuan said, his gaze still fixed on Lu Huai's face, as if he wanted to deeply engrave his appearance in his heart. Who, you, come over here and have something to say to you. Lu Huai's cousin was also frightened by the things on the river, and her voice trembled slightly. Wei Zijuan chuckled lightly in his heart, but he couldn't help but admire this person. He was so scared of his character that he could even think of other things. He was truly a cruel person. But just thinking about it, as a young woman, being able to follow these followers here is enough to prove that she is extraordinary. Miss Biao, what's up? Let's wait for the master to wake up before asking. A worried attendant glanced at Prince Chao and couldn't help but speak up. From the expression on his face, Wei Zijuan was certain that he was worried about himself and wanted to help him. Well, it has been proven that there is a coexistence of good and evil in the world. With the presence of evil people, there will naturally be good people. The cousin, still covered in a black veil, responded with a cold gaze from the attendant. Wei Zijuan looked at the attendant's hesitation and helplessness as he lowered his head, wanting to say thank you to him. Although his speech did not stop anything, at least it made Wei Zijuan feel good intentions, which was enough for her. Wei Zijuan wanted to give the attendant a grateful smile, but the person no longer looked up. Facing the disdainful and disgusted gaze of his cousin, Wei Zijuan walked over. Wei Zijuan's face was actually covered with a handkerchief, but the Miss Biao's eyes revealed that she was just a beautiful woman. In order to avoid trouble, she not only had scars left by acne on her face, but also had dark skin. How on earth did you, such an ugly woman, deceive my brother into getting married? My cousin asked in a low voice with angry eyes. Although it was in a low voice, the bamboo raft was only so big, and the people on the raft were all practitioners with good hearing, so naturally they all heard it. Upon hearing this, Wei Zijuan did not feel any anger or embarrassment. Instead, he chuckled lightly and said, "This girl looks quite intelligent, but how could she ask such a question? She didn't answer you before because he's blind." Her voice was not deliberately lowered like this, Miss Biao, because she felt it was unnecessary. Lu Huai was sleeping and unable to hear, and what was the connection between what others heard and couldn't hear? Even if these people may learn what she just said to Lu Huai in the future, so what? Lu Huai's cousin never expected to face each other face to face. She still spoke in such a tone that she felt a bit confused. After a moment, she pointed at Wei Zijuan with even more anger and said, "You are such a shameless woman. Also, how could you say that to my brother? Even if he can't see through his eyes, it's not something you deserve. You don't even deserve to be by his side, like pouring night fragrance. Don't be so anxious, girl. It's not up to you to say whether I am worthy of my husband or not. What if I am not worthy? We have worshipped heaven and earth. Do you think you are worthy of him? Alas, unfortunately, what's the use of your beauty? He can't see you and didn't marry you." Wei Zijuan smiled calmly, as if he was joking with a very familiar person. You, what are you talking about? My cousin was so old that she had never been bullied like this before, and she was stuck for a moment. The people on the raft, while paying attention to the situation on the river and ahead, listened to their conversation. Some people were worried that Wei Zijuan would come. It's really not smart. In this situation, why not lower your head? Is this relying on bowing to the master? However, the identity of the master, whether such a worship hall can be counted or not, is not certain. The key is to anger Miss Biao, who is already full of anger, and the consequences. The person who spoke up earlier to help Wei Zijuan raised his head and gently shook his head to make a look at her, but unfortunately, the other person did not look at him. After Wei Zijuan finished speaking, he raised his foot and took another step forward, standing closer to Miss Biao. This time, when she spoke, she lowered her voice and said, "I like him, right? Unfortunately, you don't deserve him. Even if his eyes can see you, they will definitely not look up to you." Wei Zijuan only knew that based on his own woman's intuition, Lu Huai, this cousin, definitely admired him. So, as soon as you speak, you frequently provoke the other person. However, what she didn't know was that the last sentence really added fuel to the fire and completely angered the other party. "Ugly woman, go die." The woman across from her, whose tone of anger had changed, raised her hand and pushed towards Wei Zijuan. She has loved her cousin since she was young. At that time, his eyes were still good, but he always turned a blind eye to her. "No, no," one of the attendants blurted out a shout, and people rushed over to try to grab the person who was leaning back, but in vain. They watched helplessly as she fell into the river and saw the things that had always been floating on the river surface collide and churn with each other in an instant. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Disputes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Disputes. The person supporting the raft tried to stop it, but the river was turbulent and he was not good at it, so he could only look anxiously at his other companions. And the other companions, at this moment, looked at the river where the woman had fallen, turning red and boiling. Rao, who had been licking blood on the tip of their knives, was also shocked by the sight before them and broke out in a cold sweat. That cousin is also in the same state of panic. She has killed someone before, but she has never seen a scene where this person is instantly torn apart and snatched for food by those things when she falls into the water. Miss Biao, no matter what, she is the wife of the Lord who has worshipped before. How to deal with or place her is also up to the Lord to make his own decision. How can you? The person who spoke up earlier to help Wei Zijuan couldn't help but speak up. His voice called Miss Biao, who was still in a state of shock, back to her senses. "Juoyan, please shut up and forget your identity. Even you dare to point fingers at me. My cousin has bad eyes, and there's something we don't know about, but your eyes are good and your ears are not deaf. You just saw and heard about it. Do you think she's a good person? Do you think a woman like her is someone my cousin likes and willingly marries? My cousin has always been in such a precarious situation, and you are the most aware of it. Leaving that woman behind only harms my cousin. Let me remind you, after my cousin wakes up, if he doesn't ask in person, please keep your mouth shut and don't worry too much." Miss Biao's tone have finally recovered. The few people on the raft looked at each other, frowned, and looked forward without saying a word. There was no trace of that thing behind the raft, but the atmosphere was even more dull than before. "Alright, Ian, it's pointless to talk too much about things at this point," someone whispered to the brother who frowned tightly, afraid that he would speak again. However, no matter what, the reason why we were able to successfully escape this time is also because of that woman. Being a person requires conscience. The master is also the most kind-hearted, and Miss Yurong has caused the master to fall into injustice. Juoyan said reluctantly, as there were no outsiders on the raft, "You could call your name now. Even if it's unclear why the master got married to that woman, at least she is the closest person to the master here. What's wrong with being ugly? As long as you have a good heart, just like Miss Biao, who is as beautiful as a flower but has a malicious heart, that's all." Watching the master still sleeping, Juoyan was very worried. "Look, that's right there, isn't it?" Someone pointed not far ahead and shouted. The others looked together and said, yes, that's probably what the woman said. Due to the protruding stone mountain not far ahead, the river surface here has become more stable. The rafters easily pushed the raft towards that side, jumping down to explore the path on the stone mountain with 3 people. The rest of the people watched over the drowsy person on the raft, looking around cautiously from time to time. If something was wrong, they immediately lifted the raft and left. Half an hour later, they heard the birds chirping on the mountain that they understood, and then picked up their master and got off the raft, running towards the mountain. After meeting with the previous 3, one of them took out a piece of paper from his pocket, drawing a route on it. The previous waterway, the current mountain road, the distance to rest, and the location with traps were clearly marked. I said, you really don't plan to follow what that woman gave you? Jiang Yurong then realized that the woman had returned the route map and asked in a low voice. A few people looked at her at the same time when they heard the words. Although no one spoke, the meaning in their eyes was very obvious. They were going according to the markings on this picture. Isn't this for the sake of caution? You didn't even know that woman before, why didn't you doubt her at all? She was intelligent, and from the eyes of these attendants, she got the answer, so she didn't have the arrogant tone she had with Shui Yan on the raft before. Miss Yurong, all we know is that we can follow her route to escape the pursuers and arrive here safely. Besides, we are not familiar with the terrain here. If we don't trust that woman, who do we trust? Do you think blindly and walk aimlessly? Shui Yan spoke up, but the other few felt helpless upon hearing it. Shui Yan has always been steady, but this time he repeatedly clashed with Miss Yurong due to a strange woman. Everyone is also very worried. Now that someone is needed outside, Yurong may not treat him well, but once he goes back, Shui Yan's life will definitely be difficult in the future, and he may not know what will happen. Miss Yurong's father is the uncle of the master and also a supporter of the master. Even if Miss Biao treats Shui Yan well, what can the master do with Miss Biao? Isn't it precisely because of this relationship that she dared to take action against that woman on that raft? Even if that woman is really important in the master's heart, what can the master do to Miss Yurong after knowing the truth? That woman is a married woman who married in court, but in that place, it is normal for the family not to recognize her without the orders of her parents and matchmakers. Besides, the woman is already dead. Even if the master is angry, he won't offend the living for the sake of a dead one. Since you all feel that this is not inappropriate, then let's do as you please. Anyway, I have already mentioned my ugly words and reminded you. Jiang Yurong's tone was still very firm. She said so, and the others didn't say anything, but they were all muttering in their hearts. Although they had brief contact with the woman, from her calm command of the escape route in the face of danger, and the meticulous planning of the route, this woman was not a rascal at all. But on that raft, why did she do that? The route on the blueprint is only about how to leave the soul-broken valley, and it disappears after leaving the valley. But the terrain outside the valley is not so unfamiliar to them, and they travel day and night to avoid pursuit. On the way, I also consulted with a doctor to see my master again, and it was said that there was no major problem. I should wake up soon, so the group felt more at ease. Jiang Yurong still insists on her opinion that the master has been sleeping and not waking up. She just thinks it's some conspiracy of the woman who fell into the river. Upon hearing her words, Shui Yan was about to speak, but was covered by his quick-witted brother next to him. Another day and night later, the group finally met up with their own people who came to pick them up, and they also had a carriage, so they no longer had to carry their master on their backs. At this moment, walking on the opposite path to this group of people, a beggar in tattered clothes, while resting at a fork in the road, also took out a piece of paper from his pocket and unfolded it to confirm that his direction was correct. She was Wei Zijuan, who was pushed into the river by Jiang Yurong that day. When she was in the valley, she was certain that Lu Huai, the cousin, was not a good person. So, in the matter of pretending to die and running away, I arranged an important task for Miss Biao. Wei Zijuan cannot be certain what Lu Huai will do to his cousin after waking up and knowing about her. But shouldn't it have any impact at all? It's not her way, Zijuan's petty heart. Who would have let that cousin treat her that way? It could be considered a lesson for the other party. While taking a break, take out a piece of dried deer meat and slowly eat it. I don't know where he is now, but the couple did it really well. Until I died, I never knew his real name or his identity. When he wakes up and opens his eyes to see something, he should be very happy. A married couple can only give him such a gift. And he actually gave her a gift, which is the best and unique gift in this world for her. Thinking of this, her hand moved to her abdomen and she must find a place to settle down and give birth before appearing clumsy. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Wake Up. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Wake up. On the morning of the third day after leaving the soul-breaking valley, in a small inn on the way to the capital, a few attendants stood in front of the bed in the corner room, surprised and worried. Surprisingly, the master finally woke up after sleeping for 3 days. Worried that the master was very strange when he woke up, and there was no response when greeting him. He just sat there in a daze. What should we do? Even if we don't stop day and night, we still have 10 days to go to the capital. Why don't we go find a doctor first to take a look? What kind of good doctor can there be in this small place? What should we do then? The several attendants were so anxious that they spun around in place. Standing on the side, Jiang Yurong bit her lips and looked at her cousins waking up. She really regretted it. If that woman really did something to her cousin, the only answer would be if she knew it herself. Jiang Yurong dared not continue to think about it. I remember her father once said, when walking in the martial arts world, don't be careless, don't underestimate those inconspicuous people like the 3 teachings and 9 streams. They are very skilled and cunning, and the survival path that can help them establish themselves in the martial arts world is not something that anyone can crack. Why are you so irrational? Why can't you wait for your cousin to wake up and make sure his body is really healthy before dealing with that woman? Master, what's wrong with you? Zhuo Yan knelt down with a burst of tears in his voice, a 7-foot-tall man. The person sitting on the bed suddenly got off the ground, stood up, and walked towards the window. Master, whatever you want, just give orders to your subordinates. Kneeling and standing quickly stepped forward to help, not in a familiar environment, afraid that he might bump into it. Someone quickly picked up the master's cotton robe and stepped forward, don't freeze it in the cold weather. However, only when their hands touched the master did they break free, and when they reached the window, they stopped and extended their slightly trembling hands to open it. It was snowing outside, and a cold wind swept snowflakes in. The person pushing the window still stretched out their palm and spread it out, catching the wind like their own snowflakes, watching them fall and melt in their palm. Master! Zhuo Yan, standing beside him, suddenly exclaimed in surprise. Others also began to come to their senses, their faces filled with the same shock and disbelief. Is it really? How could it be? The person wearing only a middle coat, completely disregarding whether it was cold or not, looked further out the window, saw the eaves across the street, and saw the smoke rising from the chimney further away. He slowly turned around, looked around the room, and then looked at each person one by one. How could it be like this? During the 8 years of blindness, my father posted extensively on the imperial list, searching for famous doctors for him, and he also searched everywhere for doctors himself. Many famous doctors in China have seen it. I don't know how many difficult to drink medicinal soups I have tried, and I don't know how many treatment methods I have tried. Isn't it all a disappointment? After he had already given up hope and accepted his lifelong blindness, surprisingly, he could see it. Master, your eyes are really good. Woo-woo, the heavens have eyes. The attendants finally confirmed that the master's eyes were really good, and they were all excited. The person holding a cotton robe quickly wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes with his sleeves and stepped forward to drape them over his master. Someone quickly helped the master sit back on the bed, wiped his feet with a collar, and put on cloth socks. Cousin, I'm Yurong. Jiang Yurong finally regained consciousness and cautiously approached with surprise. My gaze lingered on her face for a moment, but I just nodded at her and said, "You guys go out first. I want to be alone." "Yes." Several attendants immediately followed suit and walked out. Jiang Yurong didn't want to leave but didn't dare to stay. He turned his head and looked at his expressionless cousin again, then quickly walked out. The door was closed, and inside the room, only the unclosed window could hear the whirring wind. The person sitting back on the bed extended their hands again, looked at them, looked around again, took a few deep breaths, and tried to calm their emotions. He is the fifth son of the current emperor and was granted the title of King Ji at the age of 12. His surname is Hizexu. When he met her, he lied that he had lost his memory, so she gave him a name and said that the person he met under the locust tree was called Lu Huai. Looking back one by one, the last scene in my mind was eating and drinking with San Yang. He was thinking about how to explain to her that he had not suffered from amnesia before, nor was it to deceive her. At that time, he had no idea that he would be married to her after 3 months. But as soon as he spoke, she said to eat first and let's talk after dinner. The first drink was fine, the second one was normal, and after the third drink, he began to feel drowsy and then didn't know anything. I don't know how long it has been since then, but it seems like he just slept for a while. This sleep was very comfortable, without dreaming. As soon as he woke up, he opened his eyes and felt uncomfortable, as if they were being pierced by light. At that time, he was lying down, not knowing what was going on, but his eyes adapted and no longer felt uncomfortable, only to find that his eyes had actually recovered and could see things. And, it's not blurry, but very clear, even the web of the spider web in the corner of the wall can be seen very clearly. After about a stick of incense, a call came from inside the door, and the waiting people quickly entered. After the surprise, everyone could only feel uneasy at this moment. Someone secretly glanced at Jiang Yurong, feeling her even more uneasy. "Do you know you're scared now? Why did you go earlier?" Dressed neatly and well-groomed, Hizexu sat on the chair with a lively expression. As his eyes regained their composure, his gaze swept over, and everyone felt a very different sense of oppression than before. "Where is she now?" Hizexu suppressed his urgency and asked slowly. "She." Several attendants coincidentally looked at Jiang Yurong on the side and quickly lowered their heads, without any intention of rushing to tell the master the answer. Hizexu's gaze stopped on Jiang Yurong's face, watching her face turn pale, and he could more clearly feel her fear at this moment. "Speak." The reactions of the attendants and this cousin made Hizexu's heart thump, and a sense of unease surged from the bottom of his heart. "Cousin," she stumbled and fell into the river while escaping together. "We wanted to save her, but the fierce beasts in the river surrounded us, and we had no chance." Jiang Yurong's body trembled slightly, and her voice also trembled. After speaking, she turned her gaze away, not daring to look at Hizexu. Lying. A few attendants originally thought that this Miss Biao would rely on her identity as before and be honest. The attendants did not look at Miss Biao, but nervously paid attention to the master's reaction. Some even thought, at this moment, if the master Wan Yi was angry and wanted to take action against Miss Biao, should he stop? End of this chapter. Chapter 8. What about she? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. What about she? After Jiang Yurong's words fell, the room fell silent, so quiet that everyone couldn't help but hold their breath, not daring to take a breath. The indoor temperature suddenly dropped, even lower than outside, like being in an ice cellar. Looking at the master's face secretly, it was now even paler than Jiang Yurong's face. His gaze was so cold that wherever he saw it, it would immediately freeze into ice. "Table, cousin, me." Jiang Yurong couldn't bear the oppressive atmosphere anymore and spoke with a trembling voice. "Get out." With 2 cold words from Hizexu, everyone rushed out of the room like suffocators suddenly breathing in the air, rushing out and breathing hard in the hallway outside. The one who walked last quickly closed the door. At the moment when Jiang Yurong stepped out of the threshold, she collapsed and sat on the ground. This is the first time in her life that she has experienced such fear and embarrassment. However, none of the attendants sympathized with her, let alone anyone who stepped forward to help and comfort her. The woman who died, no matter how ugly and unworthy of the master, her marriage with the master is no longer recognized, but that is the master's woman. After all these years of being with the master, this is still the first woman of the master, and that is naturally special. A few people looked at Jiang Yurong again and saw her raise her hand to lightly caress her chest, as if she had escaped a disaster. Although everyone was feeling aggrieved about the woman in their hearts, what could happen? It all depends on the master himself whether he truly believed Miss Biao's words. After the master knows the truth, will he really not pursue Miss Biao? No one knows the answer. Also, how could the master's eyes suddenly recover after a few days of sleep? For a whole day, the people inside did not come out, nor did they let anyone in. Only when they came out, there was a loud noise, followed by the sound of things shattering and falling to the ground. The inn staff heard this and quickly came over to take a look. They stopped them and whispered that compensation would be given to the damaged items before leaving. The staff member was originally unwilling, but they looked at their fierce appearance one by one before retreating and muttering softly. The master inside didn't eat anything, and even though everyone outside was hungry, no one left to eat. Everyone is worried, the master whose eyes have only just recovered. Don't be sad because of anger, or have anything else to do. After all, I have been sleeping for 3 days and 3 nights without eating or drinking. Just as everyone was exchanging glances and trying to discuss who to let in and see the situation, they heard footsteps coming from inside. The next moment, the door opened. Eat some food and set off overnight, Hizeksu said expressionlessly as he walked out. Someone quickly went back to the room and looked around, only to find that the coffee table inside was broken and scattered on the ground, and there were several fist-sized pits on the wall with bloodstains inside. Hurry up and chase after him, let his companions settle the bill first, and pay compensation, while he sneaks up to the master's side and peeks at his hands. The positions of the fists on both hands were bloody. I wanted to go forward and bandage the master, but when I saw the master's face, I was scared and gave up. Following the master into a roadside restaurant, Hizeksu sat down and remained silent. Jiang Yurong, who had followed him, sat diagonally across from him and remained silent. His subordinates had no choice but to make their own orders. Thinking about the living conditions of the master in the valley, he quickly ordered the best dishes in the restaurant, chicken, duck, fish, and meat, as well as a few vegetarian dishes. Someone boldly asked the master whether he drank alcohol, but he shook his head, picked up the mantu from the waiter, and ate it with a big mouth and an expressionless face. The dishes hardly moved much, and when others saw the master like this, they naturally didn't have much appetite. They were hungry all day and had to fill their stomachs before heading on. Maybe there might be fighting along the way. Some people go to check out after eating well, while others wrap up the motionless roasted chicken, sauce, and duck on the table and take them on the way to eat. At the signal of several brothers, Shui Yan gathered the courage to approach the master and said, "Master, where are we going from here?" Previously at the inn, the master only said he wanted to rush overnight without saying where he was going. Without asking, everyone felt uneasy. Hizeksu remained calm and said, "Beijing." After receiving a definite response from the master, everyone felt a little more at ease. It's better to go back to the soul-cutting valley. The person is gone, going back will only bring sorrow, and there may be other unexpected events. At present, the most important thing is to quickly return to the capital. The master has been missing for too long, until some people's power has become even stronger. The attendant brought the horse, and Hizeksu stood silently in the direction behind him for a moment, then flipped over and rode forward. He remembered that on her wedding night, when she paid her respects to him, the two of them made a vow to the bright moon. From today on, husband and wife will be united, share joys and sorrows, be loyal to each other, and be one pair for a lifetime. The oath was drafted by her, and he still remembers that night when she said, "Brother Huai, our oath is only valid in this valley. After leaving here, the oath we made will not count." Originally, she had long known in her heart that their marriage was likely to undergo some changes in the future. She had to make such a vow at that time, which was probably a kind of spiritual comfort for herself. During casual conversations, she would say that it doesn't matter whether one enjoys happiness or not, as long as her husband's heart and eyes are filled with only her as a woman. She said she doesn't want to share a husband with other women. Everything can be generous, except for her husband. She should selfishly possess her husband's love alone. At that time, Hizexu still thought it was ridiculous that someone like him who was blind had nothing, and only she could marry. There would be any foolish woman who wanted to share with her a man who was blind and had nothing. However, such a simple wish was something that I couldn't let her have, and it even cost her life. She was so outgoing and kind, yet she died so tragically. He had heard of the things in the River of the Broken Soul Valley and didn't take them seriously at the time, but he didn't expect his wife to tragically die in their belly. Thinking of this, Hizexu felt a choking sensation in his throat, his eyes hot, and his heart writhing in pain. A couple met for 9 months, got married for 6 months, until her tragic death, without even knowing his identity and name. She cured her own eyes, but when he opened his eyes and could see something, he never had the chance to see her and would never know her appearance. I vaguely remember her saying that she had acne, but due to poor conditions, her face was covered in acne marks and she was very ugly. At that time, he comforted and said, "It's okay, in his heart she is the most beautiful." After saying that, Hizexu couldn't believe himself. How could he become so sweet-tongued? You should know, this is something he has always sneered at and disdained from childhood to adulthood. When speaking, it wasn't just a heartless remark to make her happy, just blurting it out. In fact, before getting married to her, he had no doubts about her background. It is normal for an orphan girl to become strong and independent after experiencing human tragedy like a plague. However, according to my subordinate, when she learned that someone was chasing them in the valley that day, she immediately gave advice and asked them to take him by water. There is a raft there, and that river is a waterway that no one ever walks on. When did she prepare that raft and the route drawn on paper? Why did you make such preparations? Is it prepared for him? This explanation is very far-fetched. Is it difficult for her to have the ability to predict? Also, since her eyes were healed by her, why hasn't she treated herself before and has been dragging on until now? Is it because of her ugly appearance that I'm afraid if I fix his eyes, I can see her appearance and dislike her? If that's the case, she shouldn't have treated him that night either. In that case, she wouldn't be afraid to cure him and be despised by him. Hizexu's mind was very confused, and the less he wanted to think about her, the more he couldn't help but think about it. He impatiently whipped the horse under his crotch with a whip, and the horse roared and ran wildly. The front hooves of the horse slipped and fell due to the snow on the road, and Hizexu, whose feet were in the saddle, also fell to the snow. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Missing Her and That Family. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Missing Her and That Family. Half a month before the Spring Festival, a group of Imperial Guards received King Ji from a location hundreds of miles outside the capital. When they arrived at the city gate, the people along the way also heard that King Ji had returned. The people are not unfamiliar with this auspicious king. Although he may have eye diseases that prevent him from seeing, he did not stay in the palace to be a happy prince. I can't see, but I can do many things for the emperor. King Ji is very strict in disciplining those around him. The people who work in the Prince Ji's mansion never bully others outside. So, King Ji has an excellent impression in the hearts of the people in the capital. I heard that I found him and returned safely, so everyone rushed forward to look. Without daring to make a loud noise, I watched as the carriage headed towards the palace surrounded by the Imperial Guards and a group of guards. Inside the carriage, Hizetsu's handsome face showed no joy of returning to the palace. He, who had regained his vision, did not excitedly go to see the place where he grew up. In his heart, what he most wanted to see was actually the home in the Broken Soul Valley thousands of miles away. The home that he lived in for over 9 months, although he couldn't see it before, he knew it was very simple, but it was the only place that made him feel warm in these years. San Yang's favorite thing is to decorate that house. Huai Gu, I want to plant a wisteria at the entrance of the courtyard, don't you think so? I have found several trees on the mountain, but my strength is too weak to dig. Can you help me dig them back? Brother Huai, I want to plant flowers around the fence wall. Whether it's good or not, when the flowers bloom, I will admire them and you can also smell the fragrance of the flowers. At this moment, her enthusiastic words echoed in his ear over and over again, sometimes fearing that he might get annoyed or disagree, and even trying to please him with coquettishness. Cute San Yang, she doesn't even know, there's no need for that. Whatever she says, he won't refuse. It was only after discovering her thoughtfulness that she deliberately hesitated for a moment when she begged for something, and she would foolishly fall for it and start acting coquettishly to please. Even though he knew he couldn't see anything, he still told him what kind of decoration he was doing, such as creating diamond-shaped gaps across the fence, which looked better than standing upright. She would even describe to him the color of the feathers of the chicks caught from the market outside the valley, and the color of the feathers when they grew old after a while. Before meeting her, what he had to do every day was to help his father do the most important things for the country. After being with her, everything was just trivial matters that had nothing to do with him before. He didn't feel bored at all, but rather liked it very much. That 9 months seemed like a dream he had, one of the warmest dreams in his life. And now, after waking up from his dream, he has returned here and is about to resume the days before. On the days when he was with her in the Broken Soul Valley, although he couldn't see with his eyes, because of her, he seemed to be able to see everything. At this moment, his eyes healed, but it seemed as if he had returned to darkness. Master, Your Highness the Crown Prince is at the entrance of the palace and should be here to pick you up. At this moment, a subordinate whispered outside the carriage. Hizetsu let out a sigh, but didn't say anything. He knew that the person who was used to doing such a prestigious thing, doing it to see his father and the emperor, was also doing it to see others. The entire court knew they were not dealing with him, but they still had to do such a thing. It's really unnecessary. Hizetsu actually knew that his subordinate was just reminding him, after all, the matter of his eyes recovering still needs to be kept confidential for the time being. There is only one reason, which is to numb the other person and make it more convenient to do certain things and investigate certain things. For example, the cause of death of the Empress Dowager back then, and how his eyes became blind. Hizetsu is not sure how long this secret can be kept hidden, so just try to investigate as much as possible. During these days of returning to Beijing along the way, he has worked hard to exercise himself to restore his daily habits that he couldn't see before, and tried to control his eyes to be blind like before. This matter is easy to say and difficult to say. The easy thing is, after all, I have been blind for over 8 years, and the so-called difficulty is that I am not really invisible. The carriage came to a stop, and the Crown Prince approached with excitement, expressing his surprise of reunion after a long separation. He choked up and called out, "Fifth brother, you have suffered. Now it's different from before." Not only did I hear this prince's hypocrisy, but I could also see it with my own eyes. Hizetsu worked hard to control his emotions, not pushing the other person away and reaching out to support his own hands due to the nausea in his heart. Compared to the impression he had of this emperor 8 years ago, when he never went blind, the current emperor feels much more experienced. Unfortunately, the other person's cultivation is still not enough. Otherwise, how could the malice in his eyes still be so clearly visible? If he doesn't want to hide it himself, why come to this long separation reunion scene of brothers? Hizetsu looked down upon his imperial brother in his heart, and with his help, he clumsily climbed onto the palace's chariot. The crown prince shouted softly at the palace attendants who were carrying the chariot, being slow, careful, and steady. On the chariot, Hizeksu paid no attention to his brother's pretentious behavior. He only had one thought in his heart. When things settled here, he would personally go back to the Soul Saber Valley to see that house with his own eyes. Take a painter back and ask the people in the valley about their description of her appearance. And the cause of her death also needs to be clarified. The reaction of her cousin Jiang Yurong and her subordinates is not right or normal. And for the last meal with Sanyang that day, her reaction was also abnormal. It's like she already knew that she would part ways with him in life and death. But even so, she still got on that raft with them. Hizeksu would never have known that his deceased wife, who had died tragically, was now leaning on a cane and struggling step by step through the wind and snow. Because of her disguise, she didn't encounter any danger along the way. As long as she doesn't take the initiative to get disliked, no one will make a messy beggar difficult. No one knows that this is a wealthy person named Fan Huazi. The inconspicuous cane in her hand contains gold beads, gold leaves, as well as gold bars and silver. When she ran away from the family, she didn't take any jewelry that could represent her identity as a precaution. I just picked some things that are used outside and won't be traced for identity information. Along the way, I encountered a shrub with a hard shell, cut it down, dug out the core, and stuffed it in. She had never used the things inside because they had never reached the point of necessity. After marrying Lu Huai, she wanted to use the things in her cane several times to add something decent to her home. However, she dared not, fearing that her careless decision would bring trouble and disaster to this happy little family. However, all her caution was of no use, and in the end, she still couldn't stay with his family. In fact, on that day, she could leave him to get rid of his subordinates, but she just thought about it in her heart. After all, he wasn't really amnesia. Even if I tell him that I am pregnant with his flesh and blood, what can I do to make him change his mind and stay? Those who can keep him, cannot keep his heart. Although I don't know his identity or what kind of upheaval he has encountered, one thing that Wei Zijuan can be certain of is that he, like himself, has unavoidable difficulties. If I know his identity and where he is in the future, can I resist not looking for him or even glancing at him? Just thinking about it, she saw a dilapidated temple on the roadside ahead. Even though she wanted to go in early to avoid the wind and snow, she still dared not walk fast. Her belly was filled with her and his bloodline, and she was the only family member besides him. She would definitely take care to protect this baby. Recently, Wei Zijuan noticed that although the temple was dilapidated, there was still a door. He pushed it open and looked inside, smelling a faint smell of blood in his breath. Having experienced many dangerous and terrifying things outside in recent years, she instinctively turned around to leave. However, it was still too late. As she turned around, a cold weapon blade had already pressed against her neck. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Breaking the Temple. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Breaking the Temple. Good man, spare your life. Wei Zijuan lowered his head to look at the blade on his neck, then at the fierce man in front of him, giving up the idea of using his cane to resist. Hua Zi. Is she still a woman? The other party was somewhat surprised. Wei Zijuan nodded, unsure of the other party's purpose, and she dared not say much. Although the other party was masked, what she could be certain of was that the person was also struggling, whether to let her go or kill her. Wei Zijuan does not regret entering this dilapidated temple. In this chaotic world, nowhere is safe. As long as the other party is struggling, it's a good thing for her. What she's afraid of is not struggling, and then she has no hope for life. After thinking about it, the other party might question where they came from and where they were going, but they saw him shaking his body and moving the weapon across her neck. Find a place to stay honest, the person warned fiercely and stumbled towards the grass pile in the corner, then collapsed on top of it. Wei Zijuan stood in place with a heart pounding, watching the person curl up and flip over in the haystack. She then looked at the temple door, only a few steps away from her. As long as you lift your legs a few steps, open the door and run hard, you should be safe. This person's situation should not have bothered to chase her out and kill her to silence her. Raising his foot and briskly walking to the door, he reached out and opened the door. Looking in the direction of the person, he saw that they were already motionless. He didn't know if he was dead or unconscious, but he definitely wouldn't have fallen asleep. In the evening, Wei Zijuan added firewood to the fire and said, "You're awake. I have baked cakes here. If you don't mind, come and have some." She didn't look in the direction of the corner, and she knew that the person had actually woken up long ago. As soon as she finished speaking, there was a faint sound coming from the haystack. I saw him standing up with a blade supporting his body. Although his steps were unsteady, they were not as unsteady as before. "Why are you still there?" The man sat across from Wei Zijuan, pulling off the veil from his face and asked in confusion. "The wind and snow are getting bigger and bigger outside, and I'm not sure if there's a place to avoid the wind and snow ahead," Wei Zijuan responded as he handed over the mixed grain pancake baked by the fire. The man hesitated for a moment, reached out and took it, then opened his mouth and took a big bite. "You're really a beggar. No matter how strong the wind and snow are compared to me, isn't it the most dangerous place here? Didn't you kill me?" Wei Zijuan responded casually, pouring out a bowl of hot water from the broken pot stewed on the fire and handing it over. Her words stunned the other person, but she still reached out to take the water and said, "Is it that simple? If I didn't kill you, I would be a good person." Wei Zijuan smiled and said, "If you can pity a beggar, even a villain, he shouldn't be so wicked." As he spoke, he baked his own hard, tattered cotton shoes. Her answer was heard by the other party, who fell silent for a moment before continuing to gulp down on hot water and eat mixed grain pancakes. A few bites of a pancake disappeared. "Is there anything else?" he asked. Wei Zijuan rummaged through his pocketbook and found a cloth bag, revealing 3 dried mantou. He handed him 2. "I want to keep one for myself, but I can't give you all." "Poof, aren't you afraid that I will kill you and rob mantou?" The man laughed at her stinginess and asked. Wei Zijuan did not smile and said, "This is not a problem that I am afraid of. If I am afraid, is it useful?" The man picked his eyebrows, nodded, and threw the 2 mantou back to her. Wei Zijuan looked at him, wrapped up the mantou and put it away. He watched the other party chew the mantou without baking it. He thought he was very hungry. "I haven't eaten anything for 2 days." She didn't ask, but the other person took the initiative to speak. "Actually, I shouldn't have eaten your food," he added. Wei Zijuan is puzzled. "It's all right to tell you. I'm poisoned and can't live any longer. It's a waste to eat your food. I'm not afraid of death, but I'm not willing to avenge myself." The man said and took another big bite of cold mantou. Wei Zijuan nodded. Previously, he wanted to see if he was dead or what was going on. He had already been diagnosed and found out that he had a highly toxic substance in his body, which had entered his internal organs. If you don't die immediately, it's not guaranteed that you can drag on for 3 to 5 months just by spending so much time. Wei Zijuan cannot be certain that even if the person who poisoned him receives the antidote within these 3 to 5 months, she can be certain that her own blood will definitely be able to detoxify him. However, whether or not to save this person and what kind of rescue method to use, we need to think carefully. We cannot save the wrong person, nor can we reveal our secrets. Left and right, this person will be fine for a while, so she plans to take another look and think carefully about countermeasures. By the way, where are you planning to go? The poison on a man's body doesn't always break out, and when it doesn't, he looks just like a normal person. Perhaps it is a dying person who speaks kindly, or perhaps it is a lonely person who has been wandering the martial arts world for a long time. At this moment, words have become more frequent. Shuzhou. Wei Zijuan felt that he could tell the truth. What? Shuzhou. There are relatives you can go to there. The man asked in surprise. If you go to Shuzhou, it is indeed in this direction. As soon as he spoke, he didn't feel like his own style. When did he become so gossipy and meddling? Or is it because the other party is a poor beggar? Wei Zijuan shook his head and said, no. Why are you still walking that way without you? Aren't beggars heading towards prosperous and stable places? The man became even more curious. Wei Zijuan smiled helplessly and said, in the years of war, there were already few prosperous places. I have many beggars and refugees, so it's not necessarily a good idea to go there. The man was stunned for a moment upon hearing this, and his expression changed when he looked at Wei Zijuan. He nodded in approval and said, what you said is true. But you don't know about the situation in Shuzhou, do you? I heard some along the way that it was the border of the three kingdoms. It used to be bustling, but now due to the wars between the three kingdoms, it and the critical ground have become a neglected area. The most chaotic and unsafe place is that there will always be a turning point when the chaos reaches its extreme. And you see, as a lonely and helpless girl like me, with no one to turn to, I can only go there and try my luck. Maybe my life is there. Wei Zijuan still told the truth. The man nodded again, fully agreeing with her point of view. Unexpectedly, a beggar, who was still a woman, could think like this and have such a far-sighted vision. Unfortunately, my own life is in jeopardy now. Otherwise, I could have escorted you on the way, otherwise you wouldn't have arrived at the Chinese New Year alone, the man said regretfully. I'm a beggar. There's no such thing as celebrating the Chinese New Year, let's just go wherever we go. However, with your words, I'm already very grateful, Wei Zijuan smiled. The slightest kindness of a stranger can warm her up. She, who is detached from a large family, actually cares a lot about this. The more she said that, the more uncomfortable the man felt and his brow furrowed. Wei Zijuan looked puzzled as well. He had said something wrong, which had stimulated him. End of this chapter.